Without further ado, I'd like to, first of all, thank you for your patience and allowing us and being flexible enough to allow us to start a wee bit late. I'd like to invite Dr. Tim Malloy to chair our closing plenary. Kia ora.
Kia ora katoa. My name is Tim Malloy. I'm a GP in Wellsford, a small town north of Auckland, about an hour up the road from here. And I'm here to chair this panel discussion on Prime. And I'm hopeful that most of us in the room here are interested in Prime. What is Prime, for those who don't know? Primary Response in Medical Emergencies is the acronym for a co-response service that we as rural health practitioners provide in conjunction with the ambulance services across the whole of the rural sector in New Zealand. This panel is we're going to have a discussion, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction of where we're at, and then I'm going to get some of my colleagues to talk to their particular view, and then we're going to ask you, the audience, to provide us with some questions, and we will hopefully provide you with some answers. So in 2016, the National Ambulance Sector Office, on behalf of ACC and the Ministry of Health, asked for formal feedback on the Prime service. The purpose of this feedback was to better understand the issues being raised by Prime practitioners and other stakeholders, and to establish whether a formal review was required. NASO received a considerable amount of feedback from a range of sources across the sector, and a decision was made to proceed with a formal review of Prime. As we know, the scope of the review was limited to recommendations that could be implemented within the existing funding envelope. A steering group was established to oversee the review and included representatives from NASO, ACC, the Ministry of Health, the New Zealand Rural GP Network, St John's, and the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners, and the College of Primary Healthcare Nurses. The key objectives of the review were to create recommendations that support the development of the Prime service that is dynamic, balanced centrally and locally, and aligns to the themes of the New Zealand Health Strategy. The project expected to realise outcomes and benefits such as relevance and value to rural ambulance services, practitioners feeling well supported in their roles, financial sustainability with well understood and transparent funding and administration. The steering group established 5 separate working groups to review the key issues raised in the initial stakeholder feedback and to create recommendations to address these. As a result, the working group submitted over 190 recommendations to the steering group in October 2016. The scope of each working group is described in the table. The steering group acknowledged the considerable contribution of members from the working groups who, in addition to their normal commitments, provided a range of recommendations on specific issues. With the final report following 2 rounds of consultation with the sector, it was finally completed in May 2017, and it was presented to the NASO leadership team who made the comments. I'm not going to go through them all. There are a significant number of them, but these were essentially the findings of the review process. The inaugural meeting of the National Prime Committee was held on Friday the 15th of January 2018, and a second meeting was held on the 15th of March 2018. The plan is to hold a minimum of 4 meetings during the first year. As noted in the governance group's comments, the committee is chaired by the New Zealand Rural General Practice Network nominee, and the network went through an expression of interest process for this key role. And I was appointed in December 2017 to serve as the inaugural chair of the committee. A work plan has been developed to implement the recommendations. This involves NASO working closely with St John's, the Rural General Practice Network, and representatives from prime providers and practitioners to work through the key findings of the review. Many of you will have read the Prime Review report already and will be familiar with the recommendations, so I don't propose to go into them in great detail. There is a list here of some of those key findings and what's likely to happen. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Dan. Dan is from St John's, and he will tell you where we're at in terms of these recent developments.
Hi all, my name's Dan Owes. I'm an intensive care paramedic based in Christchurch, and my current role is Assistant Director of Operations from St John. In April last year, or actually in July, internally within St John, responsibility for the delivery of Prime, and I guess essentially taking what we've got now, or what we had in the review, and accelerating that forward to what we want it to be, in conjunction with colleagues in the National Prime Committee, sort of fell within our area. And so our focus within over the past 9 months, we've done lots of tactical stuff, sort of the stuff that you would expect that we would crack on with ahead of the National Prime Committee being established. So fundamentally, we've tried to really understand the review. We've been able to increase the number of FTE that we have supporting Prime within St John. So we've now got a couple of additional dedicated people, which is really cool. We've been working on some of the basics, so improving communication, ensuring we've got all of the latest information so that we can make the right decisions to support you, and putting in place some of the quick wins, so the new CPG application for Prime practitioners, the mobile data terminal trial in Welsford, which I was talking to with Tim this morning, which we're looking to extend, and of course starting work on some of the longer term things that we could get started prior to the formation of the National Prime Committee. I guess some of the longer term things that we're already working on, you can see there on the slide, probably some areas to highlight. So we're currently doing an analysis of the Prime site locations, having a look at the overall workload, projected growth, access to paramedic level care and the future deployment of ambulance resources, so that we can produce a report based on some very clever technology that us and other allied services run to predict where we need Prime sites in the future, and so we'll take that back to the National Prime Committee for them to consider. One of the areas we've been doing a lot of work on is something called reprioritisation. So we've taken the 1,500 determinants that ambulance service users, and I'm very confident that we need all 1,500, and we have compared those to the outcomes of patients it's seen. So we've got our electronic patient report form platform, which means we're able to link the response determinants to what's happening at the scene, so the patient status, and that's going to be implemented in May or June, and that reduces the volume of red and purple incidents classified by St John, which will then impact obviously Prime notifications and things, which means hopefully we're notifying you of the right incidents. So substantially for our red call-outs, which is our highest area, we're currently 48% of all 111 calls to St John result in a red response, which is an automatic Prime notification, and that'll be reduced to 17%, so quite a significant change there. Another bit of work is our health and safety bundle. So being an AMBO, we like good toys. So one of our focus has been spending some of the Prime surplus we had from last year on getting new gear, and that'll be distributed to all of the Prime sites in the next couple of months, so helmets, vests, things like that. On the radar for next year, well, we're currently working through a work plan, and obviously that work plan depends on the needs of the Prime Committee. It takes the recommendations of the Prime Services Review. Areas for focus for us is really, funding allocation, however much funding is allocated to Prime, making sure that's distributed according to the principles of the review and the requirements of the National Prime Committee. Obviously strengthening our Prime relationships, and this is something that we need to do better at in some communities, and we know that. Data capture is an important one for us as well, because we think that there's this sort of the value that Prime provides, not only in terms of the patient but in a broader health context, and we can't articulate that very well at the moment. We really want to be able to. And so, and being a paramedic, as I mentioned before, any other toys that we're able to get for Prime along the way we'll definitely grab and try and get out there as well. So that's sort of our areas of focus. Thank you.
So, the fundamental theme running behind all of this that I'm sure you all want to talk about, and the real concern, the elephant in the room, is funding. So one of the upshots of our most recent meeting was that it became very clear that in any modelling that we do, using the premise that we have no more money, was unfortunately going to mean winners and losers in what I consider to be one of the most fragile services in rural communities. The net result, in my opinion, would be many of our sites would be lost to what I think is critical emergency work. So the current state of play is that the Prime Committee have been advised that we, the Prime providers, under the umbrella of the New Zealand Rural General Practice Network, will be exploring a business case to put to government for more funding. How that funding will look, and therefore what the net result will be in its distribution, is yet to be determined. But what we are very clear about is that we cannot do what we are required to do inside of the same envelope. So we must ask the state to alter that envelope. As Dalton indicated yesterday, we don't believe that we're talking about a significant amount of resource, but we are talking about some resource. So that's where we're at currently, and I guess we're going to be awaiting the budget round with interest and the political process that will sit in behind that. I'd now like to introduce the other members of the panel here today, two of our Prime providers, both of whom are also on the Prime Committee. And I'll start with Kate and then I'll hand over to Buzz just to introduce themselves briefly. And then the floor will be yours and we'll be open for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm a nurse practitioner currently living in rural West Otago and working in Gore in primary health care. The Gore is not a Prime site, so I travel to Twizel, Wanaka and Central Otago to work in the Prime practitioner role. I've been working in this role for the last 14 years and have a real passion for Prime. So my role on the National Prime Committee is to represent nurses, advocating that the work that nurses do is better recognised and highly valued, and that there is ongoing improvement to keep nurses safe in delivering care to their rural communities. I would also like to see improved communication and collaboration between key stakeholders involved in Prime where nurses are concerned. I was fortunate to be on the National Prime Review Committee and the Clinical Governance Working Party, and therefore I've got a strong desire to see that the hard work that was done in the Prime Review to improve things for nurses and all Prime practitioners comes to fruition. So a couple of the things that we've already done, been involved in the Prime curriculum review from a nursing perspective, and also the evolution of clearer guidelines for nurses using standing orders when working in the Prime practitioner role. This is not to be confused with standing orders from the after-hours service. So I'm hoping that I can help positioning nurses positively going forward. We know there's a lot of nurses out there working in isolation independently in the Prime role, and I think that it needs to be recognised more that nurses are a key to this service going forward.
Thank you, Kate. Kate, I'm just going to say, myself and I think every other colleague you've got in the room, I salute the nurses enormously for Prime. If it weren't for the nurses, we would have no Prime. It's that black and white, and I think you guys are amazing how you stood up to the plate and got trained and taking the risk. It's just awesome. So, look, well done, and thank you, nurses. We just couldn't do this at all without you. My interest in Prime is interesting, really. I was one of the first ever Prime sites, and now I've just developed one of the latest Prime sites, which is really quite cute. The thing I love about Prime, actually the thing I love about this network is that there's two things about us, everybody in this room. We give a shit about each other and we give a shit about our communities. And that epitomises Prime. Not only do we give a shit about ourselves, of course we do, we're willing to be trained up to a higher level than we probably thought we would do, and we're willing to do stuff we otherwise wouldn't do. But more importantly, we give a shit about our communities, and I would propose that any Prime practitioner who goes out to any medical disaster happening in their area when you know the people who have been injured, who've had an accident or who are unwell, and when you know the people who are with you, working with those people, you go the extra mile, and we just do a little bit better. And if nothing else, I think Prime has that blood coursing through its veins. And for that reason, I'm passionate about Prime, passionate about its success, and passionate about getting it adequately funded, because one thing is patently obvious: we've been so hilariously underfunded since day one. It's time we actually got that correct. So I'm looking forward to this fight. It's going to be a good one, and one we're just not going to lose. Thank you, Tim.
Anybody have any questions for us?
Peter Rodwell. As Tim will know, and a number of others will know, I've been involved prior to Prime in the educational process of this, and I always saw the issues with Prime. Number one, its structure, and I'd like to congratulate you on achieving governance, an independent governance committee, and I think that may answer most, if not all, of the basic structural problems. The second issue that I have was with both standards and quality of the educational or training program, and then the ongoing side of that, which is the ongoing standards and quality of the delivery of the system. And I think actually if we get that right, as much as I see under the current system you need a lot more money, if we actually get those right, I'm not convinced that we actually need a lot more money. But I appreciate your response to that.
Where do we start? I'll hand you over to Dan.
So I think the part I can touch on is the curriculum. So we agree with you that the curriculum needs to be improved, and we have now drafted the new Prime curriculum. It is paramedic based, so it's paramedic level based, and that has now had input from colleagues across Prime. And in terms of the structure of the initial training, so that's still 5 days. It's much more practically based, because as we know, you bring an awful grounded level of knowledge into there. So actually it's about the application when you get in there, not so much about us teaching you how a heart works, for example. You tend to know that. And for the Prime refresher, we're looking at bringing that back to 1 day and making it very much practically based with the information available online. So much along the same lines as the CPD that you would get in other areas. And so I think that's probably...
With regards to the system quality, I think a number of the improvements that we're talking about have already been implemented in terms of the implementation of the review recommendations. I'm, like you, hope that the National Committee creating an oversight for governance of the whole process will go a long way to, if you like, keeping it honest. I guess at the end of the day, the proof will be in the pudding. We just need to see what happens over the next couple of years.
The other thing I'd just like to say is that something new that's been introduced is the access to EAP for Prime practitioners, which is something we haven't had in the past. And I think that that's the nature of the job, means that that's a really, really important thing for the sustainability of Prime staff going forward. So that's, as I understand it, that's going to be accessed through St John's, the way that St John's provide it to their current staff. So that's a tag on for us. So that's another thing that's really positive going forward.
Small comment. Thank you. I don't know whether we've got anybody here who is thinking of doing Prime who hasn't, or people who want to return to Prime like I have done after a bit of a gap. But having done the first ever Prime course and then just done the latest Prime course not too long ago, it is unrecognisably fantastic. So all credit to the people who put the Prime course together. It's right up there. So I'm impressed with the standards already. And as you say, the curriculum committee is going to tweak it even further. So it's good. Thank you.
I'd just like to talk about the other elephant in the room that hasn't been brought up, and that's the lack of St John's volunteers that we've got, and the expectation that as a Prime practitioner, this seems to take precedence over every other role that I have, so I'm on-call radiographer, I'm on-call for maternity, I've got a GP after-hours clinic running, I'm running a rural hospital. But when they have no St John's staff, I'm expected to go out and respond as a St John's volunteer to something that may not even be a red call, because there is no other staff or they're single crewed, and I've got to leave often a whole surgery full of people to go out to a call from there. And I think that St John's have done a great job in really sort of promoting their people through the levels and getting them really skilled compared with what, when I first came to Kaikoura, Andrew Judd from Kaikoura, the volunteers are much better skilled working alongside there, but actually we, as a result of that, we just constantly lose them, and we don't have a St John's workforce. And with the push of St John's now taking over a lot of the after-hours call and medical call-out, my concern is, again, there's more push going into there, and we don't have a reliable volunteer workforce alongside us, so we frequently now don't have anybody on call. Our locums will not go out on their own without any support around them, and I don't blame them. I don't think that's right for them to go out into situations on their own with nobody there. So I think this is a big elephant, is that actually I'm happy to be prime, but I'm not happy to be considered the backup when there isn't St John's volunteers or St John's staffing available to do it, when I've actually got already 5 other roles that I'm trying to do at the same time.
I'm guessing that's for me to respond to.
I didn't even think I had to point that out.
So firstly, having been a volunteer for a long time within St John myself, I just want to say that volunteers for St John are the jewel within our crown. They're absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't for an instant hope to take anything away from what they do. Within every rural community in New Zealand right now, we are increasingly finding it difficult to get volunteers, and we don't currently have a genuine answer to it. So there's a number of things which are contributing to that. So there's our increasing workload. So like the rest of health, we're facing year-on-year increases in workload. That means that, for example, 5 years ago when I logged my car in from home in Rolleston, just outside of Christchurch, I would be lucky to do a job every couple of nights. Now I avoid logging my car on because I will be out and pinged around the community. So I'm seeing the same thing. The driving regulations are a challenge for our volunteers. So because we've got a transport service licence, that means that they're unable to work all day and work all night. And in fact, it's dangerous for them to do so now because they're not doing one call out, they're doing several in many communities. We've also got our increased educational requirements, which from a health and safety and from a clinical perspective is the right thing to do, but it does make it more difficult for volunteers, onboarding them, maintaining them, etc. And then we do have some challenges with culture, so we don't have the right support in every community, and that's something which is an ongoing challenge for us. I guess the positive things, so firstly, we have been given by the government 400 more staff over 4 years, which is really cool. The focus of that isn't in increasing resources, it's to double crew ambulances. So we still have about 30,000 responses a year where an ambulance officer goes out and somehow manages to respond to a patient, possibly immobilise them, find a way to get them into the back of the ambulance and get them to hospital by themselves. So that's really cool. So the government's supporting us there, which is great. But alongside of that, what do we do in these communities where double crewing maybe wasn't a problem, but just getting crews out the door is a problem? We don't yet have an answer for that, to be perfectly honest, but it is something we're conscious of, it's something we're front of mind, and I suspect it's going to be one of the very big topics that we, in terms of conversations that we have with NASO and the government around support moving forward.
Sorry, Andrew, just want to make a black humorous comment here. I was just amused that we have a grown-up, intelligent organisation, the ambulance service, recognised that working from on 12 hours is dangerous. I'm just amused how many GPs in the room are working an entire weekend and thinking at what point do we become dangerous and shouldn't be working. So I'm really, we need to take a leaf out of your book. Thank you for that.
Can I just bring the issue back to Prime and point out that within the Prime contract you have the right to triage the call away. which basically means you don't have to attend. We are not the ambulance service. We are a co-response to the ambulance service. If your commitments elsewhere clinically meant that you were unable to attend, don't go.
If you've got a microphone, stand.
Hi, my name is Robin, rural GP, rural hospital doctor. I'd just like to put an observation to the panel. We know there's massive disparities between health between rural and urban regions here in New Zealand. We also know that there's obviously a need for pre-hospital care in our rural communities. But as things stand, and you may well correct me on this, there's no evidence that I'm aware of that Prime works. So, for example, if we've got a out-of-hospital arrest in a rural community versus an out-of-hospital arrest in an urban community, I'm not aware of any data to suggest how they're doing or faring in those two environments. And I put it to you, I think it would be interesting to start collecting some of this data as a way to inform maybe our practice, but also as a way to get some funding. Comments, yeah.
I think certainly during the Prime review, we identified the fact that there was a lot of data that was missing, and that was one of the things that going forward we felt we really needed to strengthen, so that to keep Prime sustainable going forward, we had much more concrete evidence to support that it makes differences to rural communities. Good comments.
Robin, that's a brilliant question. What I love about it is we started this conference on Thursday with a research day, and we're finishing this conference with a research proposal, so thank you for that. The international data is interesting. Overseas data says that if we have good, high-quality pre-hospital care, then we have a better outcome. The researchers use the word stay and play versus scoop and run. And when stay and play is compared to scoop and run, with high-quality stay and play, there's a 30% improvement in survival with people who arrive at the secondary or tertiary centre compared to scooped and run and delivered at the doorstep of the big hospital. Now then, that's overseas, and I'd be very curious, like you did, to get our New Zealand data to justify experience. My hypothesis would be that yes, we would replicate that data and we'd improve survivability. But there's a hypothesis. Let's test it. And we discovered on Thursday we've got the infrastructure now to ready to go. So let's do it.
Just to answer the question, it is really intriguing to me that we don't have a national trauma data set at all. The intensive care systems of this country have been applying to the state for years to maintain a basic data set on trauma. They have been unable to do so because it involves a very small amount of funding. In order to be able to understand the outcomes for rural trauma management, for example, you'd have to be able to compare that to urban. We don't have the urban baseline data. Now, that is a shocking state of affairs for any advanced country as far as I'm concerned. So I would completely support the idea that at the very least we should have a minimum data set.
So I can just tell you that from Dunedin Hospital, give Otago we plug here, that they do now have a trauma coordinator, and part of that trauma coordinator's role is data collection in relation to trauma. So we're on the way in Otago, so that's great.
Oh, Garlo Duffy from Methven. Question for you, Dan, my friend. Actually, to do with the training program, the revised training program, and my understanding is that the training program has been set at the paramedic level, which is a reduction in what we've been trained at previously. That, for me personally, being I see my role in Prime as value adding. You know, I bring my medical skills to this emergency situation, and I want to bring the highest level of skill that I can to this emergency situation. And previously, I've been delighted that this is the opportunity that I get to practice those unusual skills like pacing and intubation and things like that, and that I can bring those skills. Now, my understanding is in the new program, we're not going to be trained in that anymore.
So the recommendation from the Prime Review was that we don't train to that level. So we wouldn't be teaching those skills, but my understanding, and I'm going to look to my colleague in the back of the room here, is that we'll have that equipment available to you and certainly have the people there so that for those who are already trained in it, who want to maintain that competency and want to be able to practice it during the refreshers and things, that'll be available to them. And certainly, I think it's understanding that paramedic is the base level, and by all means we would hope that doctors and nurses who are otherwise skilled, obviously having an independent scope, accelerate past that. So it's the base.
So during the review, I spent quite a lot of time with Jared Stevenson from NASO talking about the wording of the Prime Review document to ensure that those people who were trained at a higher level, who are going to continue to do Prime, that you could still utilise the skills and knowledge that you had prior to this change in scope. So it doesn't mean that you can't do them. You do what you feel comfortable doing, and if you feel comfortable intubating, then you go for gold.
I think it's important we get certified for it as part of that as well.
I agree with you. If you're going to do it, then absolutely we would advocate for people to practice it. And I think the other nice thing about the Prime Services Review is if we reflect on that and decide that we've made the wrong decision, then with the support of the National Prime Committee, we can insert those things back in, which is really cool.
Hi, Tim. Graham Jelly, rural Kerry. I'm just following on from Andrea's comment, and we've talked about at the rural school discussion earlier about interprofessional relationships, and I mean we've already demonstrated fantastic relationships between ourselves as GPs, and Buzz has identified the important role of nurses. I mean, increasingly in Kerry, fire are trained up to that sort of level. The other resource that somehow doesn't seem to be talked about maybe often enough, and I'd be interested to know Dan's comment, is about we've got this reasonable workforce of Defence Force trained paramedics that are sitting in isolated existence and seem to be an underutilised resource, not only in their service, but perhaps more inclusively in our own rural general practices. You know, if I had some of the armed Defence Force personnel dispersed out into our area, I think it's a resource that would be actually utilised much better. So I'm interested in Dan's views on utilising of our Defence Force paramedics alongside them.
So previously we have had a very strong relationship with the Defence Force. So to the extent where we've been able to extend our standing orders to them and they've crewed ambulances for us. Within Christchurch previously, the medical school was based in Christchurch, and it was always an absolute pleasure to have them along. They're way better than us at trauma, which always annoys us, but they're very good at it, and they're very good at lifting as well, so that's always quite handy. But certainly, if there is anyone that has some connections there and would like to reform them, then be very, very happy to explore that. Yeah.
Just a historical point, really, but I remember when the UK ambulance service went on strike, not that I'm going to encourage you to do that, but the military stepped up to the plate, and it was until they sorted a problem out, completely staffed by military ambulances in the UK. I don't know if anybody, fellow countrymen, can remember those days. They were very amusing.
Hello, Nancy Malloy, Wellsford. Just a question. We operate in rural communities as well, in about 6 rural communities, and my question to you is one of staffing and the scarcity of your volunteers. When will St John's think about either co-location with primary care, either to work with our nurses, or actually co-locate new buildings into the IFHCs or whatever, so that we're all part of a seamless service?
Now is the answer. So we're doing this quite well in parts of Westland, and part of our property strategy, we're already exploring lots of opportunities to co-locate with police, with fire, and with different health services. So certainly rural practice. general practice. I believe so. I'm not close to the detail on that, but if you've got an idea or a proposal, then I'd be happy to meet with you afterwards and talk about it as well.
Any other questions?
Thanks, I'll be quick. Chris Henry, Kaikoura, rural GP and hospital doctor. My question is about training, actually, and can you tell me whether we're moving with any speed towards location-based training, which I believe strongly would be a really good option, for two reasons. I think it makes really good clinical sense for us to train and practice and work with our colleagues, both in the ambulance service and within our own practice and community, with our equipment in our place. That seems really obvious. And the other thing, as a business owner, I'm really pro-Prime. We respond to pretty much every Prime call. But keeping all of our nursing and doctor staff trained is a really expensive and onerous task, and it would be, we send people all over the country to get them on a course. You're paying accommodation, you're paying travel. This is not unique to me. I'd happily pay the trainer to come to our place, feed him crayfish, we'd look after him, and can we please move as rapidly as possible towards team and location-based training and refreshers. Thank you.
I'll definitely take that issue up on into the Prime Committee. I think that it makes absolute sense, and we're going to have to find a way to get a cost-effective delivery of the service in the locations. I think that's fine for the refreshers. Might prove a little bit more difficult for the initial course, which is such a large process.
I concur with Tim's comments, and one of the really cool initiatives that we've been supported by AUT with actually is development of a mobile simulation vehicle as well, which will make deploying those resources both for our volunteers but also for things like Prime so much easier. I'm very happy to explore that, Tim, especially if you've got lots of people in one area.
I think the other thing that we've tried to do as well is recognise that accessing ongoing education for rural workers is really difficult. So part of the education plan going forward is to alter the mode of delivery slightly and include some more online type work, utilising some of the St John resources, all going well. So it's something that's certainly being addressed.
So if there are no more questions, we're going to wind up in a minute, but I'm just going to make a statement more than a question, if I may, just to finish up on. Does anybody else have concerns that nobody knows who we are? Why is that? One of the issues that I believe that we need to take into the back into the Prime Committee is actually looking at how we alter the profile. It never ceases to amaze me that everybody knows that the fire go and the ambulance go and the helicopter goes, and nobody seems to know that we go as well. I think it's time we altered that profile. I think it's time that we promoted our involvement, or we will continue to be considered unnecessary. And I don't think that's true. Thanks, everybody, for your time.